They said the pass was sealed. They called it a tomb. But one overlooked sharpshooter refused to let 320 soldiers disappear into silence. The convoy rolled slowly into the mountain pass, engines rumbling in the thin air. 320 soldiers stretched across the line of armored vehicles, the routine patrol meant to project presence more than provoke action. Dust curled off the tires, carried high by winds that seemed to whistle warnings against the stone walls. Above them, jagged cliffs loomed like silent sentinels, shadows lengthening as the sun dipped lower into the horizon. Inside one of the middle vehicles sat Specialist Layla Torres, headset slung loosely around her neck. Most knew her as the comms expert, the one who patched signals, rerouted transmissions, and kept their chatter from dying in the static. What most didn't know, or preferred to forget, was the rifle locked in its case by her side. Layla had qualified as a sniper years ago, but in a unit dominated by louder voices and bigger egos, she was rarely asked to prove it. As the convoy entered the tightest stretch of the pass, Layla shifted uneasily. Her eyes scanned the ridges, tracing lines invisible to anyone else. She saw angles where crossfire could rain down, blind corners where an ambush could bloom, and above all, the wind, gusts cutting hard across the cliffs, enough to pull a bullet off its path or conceal a sniper's shot. She lifted her headset. "Command, this terrain's bad," she warned, keeping her voice even. "Crosswinds are high, visibility's cut, and these walls give perfect cover for anyone watching us. We should slow the pace, maybe reposition scouts." Static hummed for a beat before the commander's voice crackled back. "Noted, Specialist. Stay on comms, eyes forward." The dismissal hit like a familiar bruise. Layla clenched her jaw, glancing at the men around her, most scrolling through gear checks, others joking to cut the tension. They barely noticed her concern. To them, she was just the quiet voice on the radio, not the one who had once spent weeks charting bullet drop in desert winds, or who could thread a shot through a coin at 800 meters. The pass narrowed further. Rock faces crowded closer, pressing the convoy into a long metal target. Dust filled the air. Layla leaned against the glass, watching shadows flicker above. She didn't know if it was paranoia or instinct, but her gut whispered louder than the radio. Something was waiting for them in the cliffs. The warning came not with a shout, but with a roar. A streak of smoke arced down from the ridgeline, and before anyone could react, the lead vehicle exploded in a blossom of fire and twisted steel. The shockwave rattled the convoy, shaking dust and gravel loose from the cliffs above. "RPGs!" someone screamed, but the words were drowned beneath the rattle of machine gun fire. The pass lit up with muzzle flashes, the high ridges vomiting firepower into the kill zone. Bullets tore across the column, sparking off armor, punching through windshields, and slicing the air with deadly precision. Chaos surged. Engines revved, soldiers scrambled, some ducking behind tires, others firing blindly upward at enemies they couldn't see. Within seconds, the convoy was pinned, vehicles jammed tight against each other, trapped in the narrow throat of the pass. Another RPG slammed into a transport, its fuel tank igniting. Flames spread fast, licking skyward, black smoke choking the air. Screams pierced through the gunfire as medics dragged the wounded behind partial cover. Blood pooled in the dust, mixing with spilled oil. Layla's headset hissed with static, then nothing. She tapped the controls, adjusted frequencies, but the line was dead. Jammers. Whoever planned this ambush knew exactly how to blind them. "Command, do you copy?" She tried anyway, her voice caught in the void. Finally, a scratchy burst broke through. "Convoy hold position. Do not advance. Repeat, no clearance within 200 meters. Sit tight until we push reinforcements. Sit tight." Layla's gut twisted. Sitting tight meant becoming target practice. From above, the enemy held every angle. Every second the soldiers stayed boxed in, the body count rose. Another vehicle went up in flames. Shouts turned to coughs as the acrid smoke thickened, burning lungs and stinging eyes. The wounded were piling up, shoulders torn open, legs mangled, faces pale with shock. Medics worked furiously, but their hands shook. There were too many, and the fire was spreading too fast. "Where's air support?" A sergeant bellowed over the gunfire. "ETA, 20 minutes, came the reply. 20 minutes. Layla clenched her fists. 20 minutes in this kill zone might as well be a lifetime. The ridges were alive with enemy shadows, shifting with predatory patience. If the convoy stayed still, the mountain would become their grave. Layla pressed her back against the scorched hull of the carrier, heart hammering with each impact of enemy fire. Brass clinked around her boots as her comrades fired upward in desperation, most shots vanishing into rock. She squinted past the smoke, tracing the patterns that no one else could see. The ambushers weren't scattered at random. They were layered, staggered. Her eyes mapped the cliffs like a puzzle. Then she saw it. A saddle ridge above the northern wall, slightly elevated, offering a clean line across the pass. From there, one shooter could suppress the heaviest nests, buying time for the convoy to regroup. She keyed her mic, static crackling. "Command, Specialist Torres. I've got a line. The saddle ridge above Sector 3. I can climb and neutralize." The commander cut her off. "Negative. Rules are rules. No deviation from orders. Hold position." Her throat tightened. "With respect, sir, holding position is killing us. Give me 2 minutes and—" Denied. That's final. The line went dead again. Around her, another explosion rocked the convoy, shattering glass. A medic screamed for morphine. Layla looked at the burning wrecks, the blood soaking the dirt, and knew the truth. Rules weren't going to save them. She snapped open her rifle case. The weapon gleamed like an old friend. Alongside it, her weather-beaten notebook, filled with sketches of terrain, wind notations, calculations no one else bothered with. She tucked it into her vest, slung the rifle across her back, and made her decision. Keeping low, she slipped between vehicles, darting through smoke until she reached the cliff wall. Bullets chipped stone inches from her head, but she pressed on, fingers clawing into cracks, boots searching for footholds. The climb was brutal. Sweat stung her eyes, lungs burning in the thin air. Every second felt stolen, but the gunfire masked her movement. At last she pulled herself onto the ridge, body scraping raw against jagged rock. She lay flat, chest heaving, and eased her rifle into position. The notebook flipped open beside her, pages fluttering in the wind. She traced her earlier notes: wind direction, angle of elevation, bullet drop. The crosswinds that plagued the convoy could work for her up here, if she accounted for them. Through her scope, the battlefield sharpened. Enemy gunners crouched behind outcroppings, confident in their dominance. She found the nearest RPG team, their launcher reloading for another strike. Her breath slowed. She adjusted for the gusts, squeezed. Crack. The spotter collapsed, a red mist spraying the rocks. The gunner froze, then fell a second later. Layla shifted before anyone could trace the shot. Crack. Another nest went silent. She became a phantom on the ridge, rifle whispering death with every measured breath. Her shots weren't hurried. They were precise, deliberate, mathematical. She read the geometry like sheet music, her scope dancing from target to target. Below, soldiers began to notice the pressure lifting. Machine gun fire thinned. One transport managed to back into partial cover, dragging the wounded with it. Morale flickered like a flame refusing to die. On the ridge, enemy fighters scrambled, shouting in panic. They hadn't expected a sniper, much less one turning their high ground against them. Layla ignored the chaos. She worked the bolt, checked wind drift, fired again. Another RPG shattered, its blast echoing harmlessly against the far wall. But the fight wasn't done. A counter-sniper revealed himself, glass glare catching her eye. She rolled to the side a split second before his shot cracked stone where her head had been. Heart thundering, she steadied herself, ran the math in her head and exhaled. Crack. Silence. The last threat toppled over the ridge, weapon clattering into the abyss. Layla lowered her rifle, muscles trembling. Smoke still hung heavy below, but now the convoy had breathing room. Radios sputtered back to life. For the first time in hours, victory seemed possible. She pressed the notebook flat, a shaky smile ghosting her lips. They had dismissed her as just comms. But today, geometry had saved them, and she was the only one who could read it. Layla flattened herself against the stone, her cheek pressed to the rifle stock. The wind tugged at her hair, sharp and erratic, but her notes guided her, angles scribbled in pencil, quick math scrawled in margins. She steadied her breathing, let the chaos below fade into silence, and fixed her crosshairs on the first machine gun nest that had pinned the convoy since the ambush began. The gunner raked the pass with unbroken bursts, rounds chewing into steel and sandbags alike. Layla tracked the rhythm, felt the gust in her cheek, adjusted 1/2 mil to the left, and squeezed. Crack. The gunner dropped instantly, weapon clattering to the rock. The nest went quiet, the lane of fire finally opening. She cycled the bolt, shifting her scope to the left. An RPG team crouched low, their loader fumbling another warhead into the tube. They had a clear line to the convoy's rear vehicle, the one still ferrying half the medics. Layla exhaled. Crack. The loader collapsed backward. Crack. The gunner slumped forward, his warhead rolling uselessly into the dust. Below, soldiers ducked out from cover, realizing a window had opened. Fire returned in controlled bursts, squads dragging the wounded into safer positions. Shouts cut through the smoke. "Move up! Push left flank!" For the first time since the ambush began, the convoy wasn't just surviving, they were fighting back. Layla's scope swept the ridges, hunting for the next threat. She spotted a second machine gun nest, spitting rounds at a squad pinned behind a burning carrier. Their return fire sparked off uselessly at the rocks. She didn't think. She acted. Crack. The nest went dark. The pinned squad surged forward, hauling a man with a shattered leg into cover. Every shot became a ripple effect. Her bullets didn't. Just kill. They carved out breathing room, moments of oxygen in a suffocating firefight. Soldiers who had been choking on fear now shouted with renewed defiance, their formations pulling tighter. A sudden roar overhead broke through the chaos. 2 helicopters swept in low, rotors churning the smoke into spirals. Their miniguns spun, up, tearing into the ridgelines, scattering the remnants of the ambushers. Dust blasted across the pass as the first bird dropped toward the landing zone. "Choppers inbound! Evac starting!" Voices yelled below. Layla stayed prone, scope tracking. She covered the retreat with silent precision, each shot ensuring no hidden RPG could threaten the approaching aircraft. One by one, squads loaded the wounded aboard. Flames still licked the wrecks, black columns climbing toward the sky, but the noose around their neck had loosened. Then came the chatter. Radios that had been dead with static now erupted with frantic, breathless voices. "Who's taking those shots? Somebody's cutting the ridgeline to pieces. Overwatch, identify yourself." Layla hesitated, finger hovering over her mic. She could remain silent, let them believe salvation had come from nowhere. But her call sign lingered on her lips, the one she had carried through endless hours of unnoticed drills and ignored qualifications. She pressed transmit, her voice low but steady. "This is Viper 3, ridge secured. You're clear to move." A pause, then cheers rippled across the channel. "Viper 3, copy. Keep eyes on us." "Hell yeah, Viper." Below, soldiers began looking up toward the ridges, searching for their unseen guardian. Layla didn't move, didn't wave. She stayed behind her scope, unseen, silent, a shadow against the rock. The helicopters thundered away, heavy with survivors. The ambushers scattered, their fire broken. The pass, once a death trap, now echoed with the victory of the living. Layla closed her notebook, tucking it back into her vest. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from release. For hours she'd been underestimated, dismissed, forgotten. Now, with the convoy alive and airborne, her name carried on every radio. Viper 3. The last helicopter thundered off, rotors carving the smoky air as it lifted from the shattered pass. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of dying fires and the groans of twisted steel. Against all odds, The count was complete. 320 soldiers alive. Not one left behind. On the ridge, Layla finally shouldered her rifle and began the careful climb down. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, fingers scraped raw from the ascent, but she moved with quiet steadiness. When she reached the convoy's battered center, dozens of eyes turned toward her. Some were wide with disbelief, others lit with raw gratitude. Viper 3, someone whispered, and the name carried, spreading through the survivors like a spark. But before the weight of their stares could settle, a shadow stepped forward. The colonel, dust coating his uniform, face streaked with sweat and soot, stood with arms crossed, gaze locked on her. "You broke orders," he said flatly. His voice carried, sharp and cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Layla met his eyes without flinching. Her hands were still stained with gun oil, her vest scorched at the edges, but her voice was calm. "I broke procedure to keep people alive, sir." The air between them tightened. For a moment it seemed he might lash out, reassert authority the way commanders often did when defied. But behind him, the men and women of the convoy stood silent, their wounds bandaged, their bodies bruised, but alive. Every one of them knew why. The colonel's jaw shifted. He glanced at the wreckage, then at the faces of his soldiers, then back to her. "You understand what that means for your record." Layla gave the faintest shrug. "Records can be rewritten. Graves can't." The words lingered, quiet but undeniable. And this time no one dismissed her. Around them murmurs rose again. Different now, reverent, carrying pride instead of doubt. A medic resting against a tire whispered, "That was her, the one on the ridge." A squad leader, his arm in a sling, muttered, "Viper 3 held the line." Another soldier, still coughing from smoke, simply said, "She saved us." The colonel didn't reply. His silence was its own concession. He gave a curt nod, then turned away to direct the regrouping efforts. But the soldiers kept their focus on her, the quiet comms specialist who had carried a sniper's rifle up a cliff and rewritten the end of their story. For years, Layla had been the background voice in their headsets, the one logging reports, patching signals forgotten in the static. Now, when they spoke of the ambush in the pass, they would speak of her, the sniper who turned geometry into salvation, who broke rules but not faith, who saved all 320 of them. And as the convoy finally began to move again, battered but alive, the name carried forward like a banner through the ranks. Viper. The convoy rolled out of the pass at last, scarred but whole. Smoke trailed behind them, rising into the evening sky like a reminder of how close they had come to never leaving at all. Layla sat quietly in the rear of a transport, her rifle cased once more, her battered notebook resting on her lap. The pages were smudged with dirt and sweat, equations marked with hurried pencil strokes, but within those scribbles was the geometry that had saved 320 lives. No medals were handed out that night. No speeches. The colonel said little, his silence heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. Around her, though, soldiers leaned close, voices low but certain. They no longer spoke of her as a comms specialist, the quiet background presence in their radios. They spoke her call sign, Viper 3, with a reverence that turned it into something larger than a name. True valor isn't loud. It doesn't shout, doesn't demand attention. Sometimes it's the steady finger on a trigger, the calm breath in a storm, the courage to bend the rules when seconds decide life or death. And so her notebook and her call sign lived on, not as tools of a forgotten specialist, but as proof of what one soldier had done when the mountain tried to swallow them whole. Viper 3. 320 soldiers survived that day because of one sniper. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more untold stories of courage.